Welcome to the 76th episode in our AI and You podcast series. Today is Saturday, January 1st, 2022, and I'm your host, Vicar Saidi. I'm a computer scientist and engineer, a lecturer, and a consultant. I'm also the author of several books. My most recent book is about artificial intelligence and is titled The Genome Affair. The Genome Affair is a speculative work. It examines what the world might be like if some of the more extraordinary capabilities forecast to be realized in AI over the next 20 to 30 years were actually realized today. Given the growing list of frightening existential threats humankind now faces, the book pays particular attention to the impact AI is expected to have on world affairs. The book is available in ebook format for those who prefer to read on a digital device, but it's also available in a high-quality paperback edition. The Genome Affair is available on Amazon, so I hope you'll take the time to read it and to leave a review. Amazon book reviews are very helpful for writers. I'm very interested in how science and technology influence world affairs and the big questions facing humankind. Studying at the confluence of the great disciplines of human history, political science and thought, international affairs, science and technology offers a deep understanding and pedagogically important lessons of how advances in human endeavor have influenced and impacted civilization. I'm available to give talks on artificial intelligence and its related technologies, and on the impact AI is expected to have or is already having on our world. If you'd like to get in touch with me to arrange a web-based event or consulting meeting with your company or organization, you can find my contact info in the podcast notes below. Please make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and share it with others if you find the content valuable. Thank you. And now, on to today's podcast. In our last podcast, episode 75, I spoke about AI, New Year's resolutions, and societal reformation. In today's podcast, episode 76, I'll speak about AI and meritocracy. I'll offer a sweeping analysis of meritocracy from the earliest human societies living tens of thousands of years ago and up to the present, whilst also considering the implications of AI on meritocracy in the future. Let's get started. 200,000 years ago, our sapiens ancestors shared a very small portion of the terrestrial surface of the earth with many other species of hominids. Our collective population was small, and we were all nomadic bands, foraging for flora and fauna. As we traveled over large geographies, driven by changes of the season and our constant need for food. But 70,000 years ago, there was a dramatic change. Up until this point along our evolutionary journey, we sapiens sat solidly in the middle of the food chain, alongside all other species of hominids. But now, we unexpectedly found ourselves propelled to the very top of the food chain. Biologically, we were the same as before, so scientists theorized that sapiens had undergone a genetic mutation of some sort that resulted in a dramatic increase in our cognitive ability. We now found ourselves able to cooperate flexibly and in very large numbers. It is an extraordinary ability, and it is not found in any other species. Archaeological evidence consistently confirms that after this point on our evolutionary timeline, wherever humankind went on the planet, within a few thousand years of our arrival, most of the terrestrial megafauna, in other words animals over 100 pounds, in our new environment were either on the brink of extinction or were already extinct. By 40,000 years ago, a similar extinction event had inflicted all other species of hominins as well, with Homo neanderthalensis being the last non-sapiens species to vanish forever. it may be the case that the superior intellect of sapiens made it impossible for other hominin species to effectively compete for food, and when combined with the climatic changes they were then forced to endure as foragers, all remaining hominins were simply unable to adapt. Following the extinction of Neanderthalensis, for the next 40,000 years or so, we sapiens found ourselves alone as the only hominin on this planet. However, due to the continuing Ice Age, we remained in a traditional nomadic foraging lifestyle until approximately 12,000 years ago. Within our small bands of hunter-gatherers, meritocracy played an important role. Some members of sapiens bands had better hunting capabilities, whilst others were better at setting traps, catching fish, making clothes, skinning animals, retrieving fruits from tall trees, making medicines, fabricating tools, preparing food, or caring for the young and sick. Thus, there was no significant hierarchy within these primitive social systems. Everyone had their role to play to ensure the survival of the band, and there was no sense in acquiring anything unnecessary beyond what was required for survival, since nomadic societies need to travel light and simply cannot afford any excess weight. If on occasion a bully or tyrant emerged within the band, they were reasonably easy to deal with. The rest of the band could simply abandon the bully, thus leaving them without the band's protection. In such a situation, the bully would soon perish at the hands of another hostile sapiens band, or, unable to find sufficient food on their own, they might die from starvation, or perhaps undefended, they might fall prey to some animal. If, following their exile, they decided to return to their original band, they could be firmly and finally dealt with whilst sleeping. Approximately 12,000 years ago, as the Ice Age receded and the cold weather retreated towards the poles, a process occurring continuously during the preceding 3 millennia, some fortunate hunter-gatherers began finding increasingly larger fields of wheat along the Euphrates and Tigris River valleys of Mesopotamia and along the Nile River Valley in Egypt. These regions, known as the Lucky Latitudes or Fertile Crescent, now experienced abundant rainfall and a subsequent flooding of their riverbanks, and these climatic events enriched the soil and enabled the growth of previously unseen quantities of wheat. Sapiens, long accustomed to nomadic foraging, now shifted their attention to these newly discovered abundant sources of grain. They formed settlements to systematically harvest as much grain as they could and to carefully store any excess. By 10,000 years ago, most sapiens in the Fertile Crescent gradually resigned from their nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyles as they increasingly found themselves domesticated by wheat and the need to harvest, store, and plant for the next growing season. The agricultural revolution and pastoral lifestyle had begun. As their population grew and they accumulated larger and larger grain stores, along with other valuable possessions, sapiens realized there was no turning back to a nomadic lifestyle. As sapiens bands settled and established villages, towns, and cities, together with many other bands and tribes, the stratification of society soon followed, and the meritocracy they had known for 200,000 years vanished. As far back as 8,000 years ago, we have archaeological evidence of stratification of societies in southern Mesopotamia, in an early village along the riverbanks of the Euphrates known as Eridu. In this village, we find homes of very modest size, presumably for peasants, whilst other homes in the same village were expansive and possessed superior goods. By 1776 BCE, the Code of Hammurabi in Babylon emerged as the earliest documented legal code in humankind's history. It was engraved on a stela, or stone pillar. The Code of Hammurabi clearly adjudicated based upon a person's stature within society. If the accused was an aristocrat, peasant, or slave, the consequences for any infraction of the Code of Hammurabi would depend directly upon their social strata. Societies were now governed and ordered based upon the edicts of their kings and by the requirements spelled out in their myths and legends, now enforced by aristocrats and clerics. These myths were often imposed violently upon large numbers of peasants at the behest of aristocrats, monarchs, and priests, and there was no way for people to escape and return to a life of foraging. All the surrounding land was under the control of the ruling classes. Land further afield was now the possession of rival kingdoms. Nearly 4,000 years later, the English monarch, King George III, was reigning, but not ruling since he was a constitutional monarch, over the American colonies, when in July of 1776, the colonialists declared their independence from England. This now hallowed Declaration of Independence states, quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government, and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world." Close quotes. The Declaration of Independence then goes on to list, in somewhat of a Shakespearean literary flourishing, 28 serious accusations against the reigning British monarch, George III. However, the consensus amongst contemporary American historians and legal scholars is that only 2 of the accusations in the Declaration were legitimate grievances, accusations number 17 and number 22. Number 17, quote, "for imposing taxes on us without our consent," close quote. Number 22, quote, "for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever," close quote. Now, despite the propagandist character of America's Declaration of Independence, given the realities of the American colonies at the time, 2 credible accusations were deemed as sufficient for revolution in service of independence from the British Crown. Although militarily no match for Imperial Britain, indeed only with significant French support was the revolution successful, America had also outgrown the hallmarks of a colonial outpost. By 1776, the economy of the American colonies had grown to twice the size of the economy of England. America's population had reached 2.5 million, 1.9 million white colonialists, and 600,000 African slaves who were not subject to the inalienable rights outlined in the Declaration of Independence. There were more bookshops in Philadelphia than in all of Britain, excluding London. There was also considerable consternation amongst the American commercial and political classes as they observed the mischief of the East India Company vis-à-vis the lobbying of Parliament in London on behalf of the company's commercial interests, and infamous behavior in India and the actions of Robert Clive, the new governor of Bengal. For some time, efforts were being made across many of the world's societies to establish varying degrees of equality, but in America's Declaration, a formal document was being presented that sought to enshrine equality as an inalienable right. This is a crucial step, since equality is a necessary precursor to a selection process based upon meritocracy. Since the dawn of the agricultural revolution and the founding of the American Republic, nearly 12,000 years later, America has been through extraordinary changes on its journey to live up to the ideals outlined in the Declaration of Independence and formalized in the U.S. Constitution, the amendments to the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. This is particularly true when we consider the notion in the Declaration, quote, all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, close quotes. Upon reading this passage, one cannot help but immediately think of slave ownership amongst the very men who were signatories to this document, and the obvious deficiency and duplicity of their character. Of course, when we think in this manner, we do so from a 21st century context. Our society has been through so much with regards to the issue of slavery and abolition vis-a-vis the antebellum South, the American Civil War and segregation, Jim Crow, and this gives us a much richer and more nuanced contextualization than that available to George Washington or Thomas Jefferson at the time of the American Revolution. Nevertheless, the English monarch George III had rejected slavery throughout his life. He ruled the British Empire as king for 60 years, from 1760 to 1820. He has been the third longest serving English monarch after Queen Elizabeth II and Queen Victoria, and yet he never owned a single slave. In fact, he found the notion of slavery abhorrent, even as his subjects not only owned slaves, but were engaged in slave trading enterprises. By 1965, Lyndon Johnson's administration held a 2/3 majority in both the Senate and the House of Representatives, and was thus able to pass a historic Voting Rights Act that prohibited racial discrimination in voting. This legislation and other such reforms in American society, indeed in Western society, have gradually nudged America and the West further in the direction of equality and then meritocracy. The idea from our ancient forager ancestors that equality and selection for opportunities will be based solely on the merits of an individual without regards to their ethnicity, race, religion, sex, or sexual orientation, and so forth. But structural impediments, primarily in America's education system, remain and continue to obstruct the full implementation of equality and meritocracy in this nation. Today, though, we face the extraordinary question that our ancient forager ancestors never confronted in 200,000 years, the question of whether meritocracy really is the best selection process. In fact, it has been said that meritocracy is the worst form of selection, with the exception of all other bases for selection. Unfortunately, there are significant dangers in the meritocratic approach. As we reform immigration policies in our attempt to attract the best and brightest students and workers from around the world, are we endangering America's liberal democracy? By bringing in such large numbers of students from societies that do not share American values, such as freedom of religion or speech, pluralism, or tolerance of others different from themselves, what are the potential consequences for American society when these people are given the opportunity, afforded to them through American pluralism and meritocracy, no less, to occupy highly influential and powerful roles within academia, government, and industry? In recent years, we have witnessed lawsuits in Silicon Valley as bright engineers and computer scientists from India, now employed in America's leading tech giants, import the Indian caste system and political conflicts into American companies in their attempt to prevent lower caste Indians and other minorities from rising within the company. Domestically, many Americans are finding it very difficult to accept American pluralism and tolerance as they see black men elected to the American presidency or appointed Secretary of State or Secretary of Defense. Witnessing a black woman elected as the American Vice President further angers those who reject American pluralism, tolerance, and meritocracy when these inalienable rights are expanded to non-whites. In fact, on January 6, 2021, when a violent insurrection took place on Capitol Hill at the behest of a sitting American president, the protesters and rioters were overwhelmingly citizens who rejected American pluralism, tolerance, and meritocracy, and the consequences of all the changes this was bringing for white America. With our increasingly capable artificial intelligence agents, we now have the ability to predict whether a person being considered for a position of power and authority in government, industry, or other important roles in civil society have attributes, attitudes, and values that conflict with those enshrined in our Constitution, Bill of Rights, or legal code. Thus, we can apply these increasingly accurate predictive analytical techniques to screen Americans before allowing them to participate in our meritocratic system. But would this type of screening be ethical? Our ability to understand the behavior of people in this way is increasingly very real and only expanding in sophistication. But in the wrong hands, it is most certainly an enabler of totalitarianism. However, at the same time, our liberal democracy is a priceless system that countless men and women have paid the ultimate sacrifice to achieve and protect. So, shouldn't it be right to use these AI-enabled tools in this way, since they are being employed in the interest of preserving and protecting the most critical elements of our society? Isn't it vitally important to ensure that we filter out people who pose a threat to our liberal democracy and other important institutions before they control the levers of power? As mentioned earlier in this essay, for the last 40,000 years, we sapiens have been alone at the top of the food chain on Earth. But with artificial intelligence, biotechnology, quantum computing, data science, and other fourth industrial revolution technologies, it is very possible that our species may bifurcate into hybrid cybernetic organisms that are part organic and part inorganic. It is also possible that we have superintelligent, disembodied artificial intelligence agents that are completely inorganic and silicon-based rather than organic and carbon-based. This introduces further complexity into the current concern regarding the equality and meritocracy debate that began with the agricultural revolution 12,000 years ago. More pointedly, does equality and meritocracy make any sense when these advanced bifurcated species are exponentially more intelligent than traditional sapiens that we have become so familiar with over the past 200,000 years. We need to convene our best and brightest minds across all relevant disciplines, and we need to do so quickly. We are facing both short and long-term ethical dilemmas and questions that are existential in nature for humankind, and we are unlikely to have multiple opportunities to get these things right. Thank you for spending some time with me. I'm trying to follow the TED Talk format, and so I'm keeping these podcasts typically under 20 minutes, although today's is a little bit longer. Let me know what you think. I hope you'll find these insights into artificial intelligence helpful, and I hope you'll read my new book, The Genome Affair. It's on Amazon. Until next time then, this has been the AI and You podcast with author Vicar Saidi.